Good evening and welcome to this edition of DeFacto Review, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is our commentator and economist, Jargat of DeFacto.
Good evening.
And my name is Dilto. We're live on Facebook at V Television, and we want to hear your thoughts, so send us your comments on Twitter with hashtag Jargat_DeFacto. Coming up on the program. 2 weeks ago, the Ministry of Finance submitted a draft 2019 state budget to the Parliament. The draft law on foreign currency regulation is still being discussed. Mortgage loans are expected to remain on Bank of Mongolia's balance sheet. So our first topic pertains to the 2019 state budget that was submitted to Parliament. And earlier this week, President Batotok mentioned that more thought has been put into the impact of the budget on the 2020 elections, such as conflict of interest. So could you please elaborate on some of the key statistics from this 2019 budget?
Yeah. You see, Mongolia has been proving budget first after long discussions. Then somehow after 6 months or so, they again discussed the law, and they editing it, amending it, and at the end, we got something that kind of hybrid of what we have agreed and what is coming. So this time again, they have started their annual discussions of budget. President was there, and he said, there's a lot of mistakes, a lot of things to improve. Actually, you made a budget with the thoughts of an election in 2020, because 2019 is a full year before the election, and you are spending too much money for your political purpose. And he particularly mentioned about kind of distributing 1 million, 5 billion tugrik per deputy or parliament member, which had started in the year 2000 during Inkbayar when he was the prime minister. He had distributed 1 million tugriks that time to each constituency of each parliament member. Now it's 5 billion in the form of, say, constructing, building kindergartens, schools, etc. And now it looks like they will come to the election with a lot of fundamentals, foundations of buildings made but not finished, because we cannot complete at the same time 10 times more buildings that we used to have during a year before. So that's why the president said, if you don't change all this, then I will veto your budget. That's what his message. But actually what the government is suggesting is now our budget is kind of, increased both sides, revenue and expenses, but the problem is the differences. We're spending more than we are earning. And it always happened before, and it's very unfortunate because this deficit, budget deficit, which is this time is equivalent of 5.4% of the GDP, which was 8% last year. So they said, oh, compared with the last year, we had much progress. But remember that we had much more foreign debt than last year. And the government had issued now another beautiful names, new bonds. It's called the Mazzale bond, the Gobi beer name, you know. Then Girege, etc. Horaltai bond, and each time they receive more than $500 million, $600 million, then $800 million US dollar. And namely, they are borrowing again to pay the old debts, which is maybe a little bit 1% or so cheaper. And some of them are more expensive. So what's going on in the economy of Mongolia? The government is borrowing, spending, and they pay more the previous loan with the new loan. So that was was against. And also, the other point is the budget deficit. It's a lot, and the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, who promised all the time to have no budget deficit, now he's making more budget deficit, And for your information, the European Union countries' requirement is 2% of GDP should be the size of budget deficit. And in Mongolia, it's now 5.4%. They are suggesting which we think will be more in the reality. The second is a debt ratio of the government, which is government ratio to the GDP. We are at the level of 70%. European Union is now at the level of 60%, but we have substantial difference here because all our borrowings are US dollar, but the earnings of the government is in Mongolian tugriks. So that's why the exchange rate is the key issue now, which is also provoking to make even new laws, a new draft law we will discuss after. So for a country like Mongolia, the deficit, the exchange rate, the devaluation of Mongolian tugriks is highly expected. Because if you don't have something which don't depend, something to export other than the raw materials, then you have some cushion, which is not the case. So that's what the president was warning. Remember that also he said that the coal, etc., prices, meanwhile, which is going to decrease, but the estimation is it will be up. And for example, we have been producing maximum 28 million to 30 million tons of coking coal to China, but now they say that now next year we will be doing 42 million. I mean, by which means will we have completed our new railway, which is even not started. So all this thing is really, I agree, it's really election fever budget is coming.
And it was mentioned that the Minister of Finance said that this budget was very well thought out, it was very well calculated, while the President, Mr. DeFacto, said there were so many discrepancies, there's a lot of issues that needs to be resolved. So what is causing this difference of opinions between these two?
Yeah, I mean, who is pessimist, who is optimist? That's the two point of view. And which is normal, which is supposed to be done by opposition in any democratic country. This time our president was raising the issue. In fact, 87% of our export is raw materials. Mostly it is coal, copper, and gold. And as I said, you cannot increase from 28 million tons of coal from last year, maybe this year coming to the 42 next year. Secondly, they are also very optimistic about the increase of prices for also copper. They're increasing the price. And the other thing was now everybody has 5 billion tugriks to make some projects in their own constituency, right? This is the second part of corruption character of the budget, trying to buy votes of the voice of voters. And for example, whatever they're suggesting was 300 or so new, we call it objects, meaning school buildings or kindergarten or hospital. But 70% of those have even no feasibility study, neither know any plan. It shows how irresponsible is our lawmakers bringing these sort of things to a budget, assuming that we are either the voters are stupid or don't understanding and like themselves, unfortunately. So this is the third, and the also funny thing that the president was mentioned was the Minister of Finance himself put 10 times more money than other parliament members. He's also a parliament member, remember? And also 10 times more for his constituency, which is really looked very, at least very egoistic. So the issue is now how the budget will be impacting on the private sector. That is not being discussed. That is not shown in the budget draft as well. Unfortunately, the private sector is suffering from large budget of the government, which is 33% the tax revenue level is the expenses of budget is at the level of 33% of GDP, which is high. So the more state company, more budget grows, in particular the budget deficit grows, it creates more public debt. Public debt creates more debt domestically as well, and as well as a foreign debt. And for the interest rate of this debt, the government spend more money than on any other projects, and which creates more inflation and more devaluation, which impacts very badly, negatively on the private sector. That's why many people are. That's why private sector is not creating jobs. They are losing jobs. People from the private sector now are running for better jobs in Korea and abroad, etc. Mongolians are running away, and then nobody is talking about that properly at the state level. In general, it creates non-competitive sectors, non-competitive businesses. You know, people run away from non-competitive businesses, companies, industries, or countries. That's why the Mongolians are running away to Korea. Another reason that the budget is like this, economy is like this bad, is the price is established by the state on many goods, including electric power, electricity, public transport, meat, and also education, healthcare. All this certain level is set by the government, which does not motivate the private sector to compete, because now when the price is regulated too much, the price information, the market information is already skewed. So that's the problem of the budget.
And so moving on to our second topic of the night was the foreign currency regulation that was being discussed that you said we would elaborate on later. So could you explain this law, this draft law on foreign currency?
That's one of the non-successful should to be, a successful trend of Mongolian politicians to control now the exchange rate. You know, dollar to exchange rate is like two goods, and you cannot regulate prices by the government. And there are only politicians who believe that it can be, but the result is usually completely the opposite. Who tried in that way regulate the exchange rate? Turkey, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, now Russia. They never ended up with success. There are only politicians who believe that it can be done. It will have the opposite effect, the impact on the economy. Only way to, the Mongolian president had suggested now this law first in June. Then it was refused by the parliament. Then recently, 4 parliament members with the head of Oyun Chime parliament member are suggesting now another draft. So then the president office, Mr. Inkpol, bringing back again, resubmitting that old draft, and the 4 members are submitting another draft. So we have at least 2 drafts that makes Mongolian economy less competitive, because if you restrict the exchange rate by these regulations, meaning that there will be a ceiling for transferring money outside or receiving, there will be more currency control made by the government, central bank. By law, they have to do. They have to report. It all stops this vibrant economics dynamics in Mongolia, which was being only the saver of the economy up to now, and they want to regulate it. And they say that why we should so much. It says that believe in dollar, etc. This is not the issue of believing in dollar. The people want to keep their value that they have created with their own labor. I mean, those people who have created. I'm not talking about corrupt people or illegal people earning money or corruptions. But those people, they will have, and they need to have, and they must have all their whatever assets in the safest form of the asset, right? That's in exchange, if it is in cash, it should be, of course, in the safest one. And it's quite normal to look for dollars. So the reason of the devaluation of Tugurik is not because we don't have a law or we need law. It is because the government of Mongolia is becoming so large. They are misusing our money and they are borrowing too much. And we don't have yet full report of Chinggis Khan, Kubilai Khan bonds money spending. And we don't have a full report because these two political parties running the country today, they have agreed in between themselves when they have been receiving the money, they were giving the money to the people related to their own party. So they cannot have hold responsible these people who misuse the money. So now who is paying back this money? We do, taxpayers. So these four politicians, and including our president also, they want to just use another political way of saving a very bad economy from being bad to worst. That's Putin's. You know, the only way, and the only success story of having the exchange rate constant or stable was in history a creation of currency board, which some countries have created. It can be done at the central bank today. Central Bank Monetary Policy Council can create this currency board, say they will agree that we will make at the level of $1 to 2,500 tugriks as today. That is the exchange rate. We're kind of pegging Mongolian tugriks to dollar. So in that way we can this exchange rate fix. But it will create certain problems for certain sectors, certain favorable conditions for other sectors, and we have to go through. Because this economy, the import of this country depends also on the quality of the currency.
And some economists have raised some concerns about this kind of law and have expressed some opposition to it. So what do you think lawmakers should input, or how should they address these concerns and re-amend this law?
It's very hard to convince them to be sober, because they are like, we call it bulls, looking, with red eyes, attacking. They are attacking with a short time frame. They want to be re-elected. So they want to be re-elected by all means at the cost of long-run economic loss of the country, which they are trying to do now. Now maybe when there's strong law, then they try to keep the exchange rate, they can succeed for first year or so. But from the next year, they will not succeed. It's like, the rolling snowball, start to roll, now you try to stop it. But you cannot do it because it keeps coming more. Then when you are moving back, and the keeping, then this snowball will go rolling with even higher speed, and they will destroy everything on the way. That's what Zimbabwe did. That's what Venezuela did. Now Turkey on that way. Now Russia is bound to follow. So please don't do any law, and it's very hard to convince these politicians because they think just to be re-elected for next elections. But yet the economy, the midterm, in particular in the midterm economy, should have really flexible rate US dollar. If you want really to mix it, then let's create currency board. That's the way.
And related to another thing about the government is in 2019, under the IMF's EFF program, the government was supposed to have had this mortgage loans transferred back on its own balance from Bank of Mongolia. However, it was decided that in 2019 that would not happen. So why is the mortgage loans not being transferred to the state?
Can you imagine? And the government was all the time saying, this new government, we will have this the mortgage project with us, and we will take it. We will move from balance of the central bank to the government balance. Now the Minister of Finance says, no, we cannot do it. We will not do it. He is not saying cannot, but he will not do that. And yes, he cannot do it. Why? Because his budget has such a deficit anyway. He has to borrow more money. Now, why he is to take into his balance all these debts? Total 4.2 trillion tugrik portfolio of this so-called mortgage loan is there in the balance of Mongol Bank, central bank. If they will move it to the government, what they will stay with is a big hole, which they can write off as a bad loan. Is the Mongol Bank ready to do so? No, because it has a debt anyway. It has, by the way, increased this Mongol Bank security that had increased substantially, almost 10 times compared for the last 2 years, several $billion. The president was mentioning about the size of this loan. So government, even if they very much want, they cannot take to your balance this sort of burden like this. It is burden. The Mongolian mortgage loan is really a burden because there's two things unusual. One is it is started by a Mongol bank, the central bank. That's abnormal. It should be started by, if needed, by the government, which did not happen. Now, once they started there, the whole concept is has a more lobby character. Because at the time, 2013, Mongolia had a lot borrowed money. Genghis Khan come in and they borrowed whatever their fund, $500 million were in the bank account in the country. Then they brought the good idea of creating this Mongolian mortgage loan scheme, which was, I think, mostly a lobby of the construction companies who had built a lot too expensive because the corruption, the land cost is a lot. So that by all means, they have increased the price unusual, and nobody can afford buying that except few people who have already apartments by this time now. So those people who can pay, they have 2-3 apartments already. But those who needs in Gir district, normal sanitation conditions, normal water, etc., utilities, they cannot pay. So what they found out is, okay, we will create a mortgage loan at 8%, but actually they have printed money with maybe no cost. The Mongol Bank gave it to commercial banks give to people at 8%. Meanwhile, the market rate of the loan in the country is over 20%. So they were trying to sell 2.5 times less product to the market, which certainly attract many people. But the problem is, as soon as they have introduced this scheme, this mortgage loan, the housing prices immediately jump 2 times. So now question comes, the market regulations, because people were expecting, and then suddenly they can have a loan, then the construction companies never decrease their prices. So now with the expectation that now the government will support them. Yes, government start to support. They are selling expensive houses with 8% interest rate. So, but because it's not sustainable, you cannot sell things, 2 times expensive things, now 2 times less, 2.5 times less. So the market dilution happening. So unfortunately, as a result, we have now about 40,000 apartments, no owners, no buyers, and 200,000 people looking for apartments. So that's the really market kind of paradox we have today, created by politicians. So you can see that from the refusing by the government to take this portfolio. Because first, it creates more debt. Second, it's not sustainable problem, the project. That's why the project goes on only within the money that is coming from those who got the mortgage loan. So they only, maybe compared to the previous ones, only maybe just fraction of it is being lended as mortgage loan. But I noticed another positive things here, which is now they finally understood. They opened their eyes and they say, now we will give this mortgage loan to the people who are coming from the Ger district. If they are buying, one chimney is disappearing, which is producing carbon dioxide, right? So if it is the case, that person has priority, one. Second, the new building constructions in Ger area districts, somewhere, they will have a priority to buy apartments from these areas. The third, they call it green housing projects. So they are more focusing to the need of the public and to the purchasing capacity of the buyers. So I think it's only a positive note in terms of the housing loan, mortgage loan of Mongolia. The rest I don't see a particular good news, and the budget is too optimistic. And remember, the president said also we need to restructure the state structure, right? He said. Yeah, on one side, yes, this country, the system doesn't work. Government running and governance is very bad. On the other hand, how long we can, and when and how, who will change it? They are talking about changing constitutions. We need to change, but when and who and how? But the probably more optimistic and cheapest in terms of cost way is to run the very clear put surveys, referendum questions on the same day of ballot next year 2020, when we will have election of the parliament. At the same time we can do the referendum asking what type of governance will you support. So if we change the structure of this state, probably we need two chambers of parliament, and maybe we can call the prime minister as president, whoever. So the things are at least clear. Okay.
Well, thank you. This concludes our show for this evening. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at the same time for another weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Good night.
See you next week.